AFSCME members vote on a long-awaited contract, and Governor Pritzker still has significant bills to sign. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. The state legislature's not been in. I don't think the governor signed some bills, but no big events yet this week, but we'll see how it goes. Here with me to discuss this today, Daisy Contreras is with NPR Illinois, often covering the Capitol. Daisy, welcome back.
Thank you, thank you.
And Peter Hancock of Capitol News Illinois, also at the Capitol. Peter, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Bernie.
You. So, AFSCME under Governor Bruce Rauner did not exactly get along. This is the largest public employee union in our state government, has about 40,000 employees. Under Governor Pritzker, late in the legislative session, it was announced that they had reached an agreement. Voting has been going on and was finishing this week. I think it's about an 11% raise over the life of the contract by, I think, 2020 something. I think it's a 3 or 4 year, 2022. Union members who have been working over the last 4 years get like $2,500, most of them, if they've worked enough to pay back for the difficult times that they had. Yeah. Maternity, paternity leave is increased some, and insurance costs to them will go up some, but not as much as I think more than doubling that Governor Rauner had wanted. It's funny, as members have been voting, Roberta Lynch is the executive director of AFSCME, and in their notice to members of key provisions of the tentative agreement, she wrote that former Governor Bruce Rauner waged an unrelenting war on state employees throughout his entire tenure in office and attempted to use negotiations for a new master contract as one of his primary weapons in that conflict. Now Bruce Rauner is gone and we are standing strong, et cetera, et cetera. We have regained economic ground, protected hard-won gains, and strengthened workplace rights. So clearly the union is happy that they have a Democratic Governor, J.B. Pritzker. Kind of a different feeling out there.
Well, when I spoke with AFSCME officials to try and get some background on how this had all happened, it goes back to the very early days of the Rauner administration. Their contract renewal was coming up, and Governor Rauner took a very hardline stand. He wanted to freeze wages. He wanted to double the cost of health insurance. All kinds of really draconian measures that he was demanding. As I understand it, the talks broke down, and so those workers, many of them are social workers in the Department for Children and Families, Department of Human Services, those people were basically working under the terms of the previous contract. And just
right, which expired I think in the summer of 2015 during Rauner's first year.
Yeah, and so that contract called for what are known as step increases. For every year of service, you move up the ladder a little bit. Rauner refused to pay the step increases. And so now when Governor Pritzker comes in, first thing he did was strike an agreement to go back pay those step increases, negotiated a new contract, which, as I understand it, is a good contract for the union, not necessarily a great one, not everything they wanted, but certainly better than what they've had the previous 4 years.
Indeed, yeah. Well, I know Governor Rauner, when he campaigned, certainly in the primary in 2014, and even on his inauguration day, he talked about one of the biggest, if not the biggest problem in Illinois state government was government union bosses, because he truly believed that government unions should not be there shouldn't be organizations that are allowed to help elect people to public office and then sit across the bargaining table from them for their way, even though this is done all over the country. But he philosophically was opposed to this, and it's just a very different atmosphere now.
Yes, and Rauner was always very business friendly, and like Roberta Lynch said, very anti-union, and so yes, a different
he would say anti-government union, and he would say pro-worker and all of that, but those arguments are a little past, and we haven't seen Governor Rauner in a time.
We had that rhetoric, that narrative for his whole time as governor. Then we have Pritzker coming in, and all of that changes. Now he's more labor friendly, maybe getting a little bit into, an animosity with some of the business leaders groups, but even then, Pritzker has been able to work with business groups across the state, and they feel like they're being listened to.
Right.
So there is communication there,
Right.
even if they're not getting exactly what they want.
Correct. Well, business groups, even in the state budget, got various things. They
Right.
got an end to or a rollback of the franchise tax. It's a key tax on many hundreds of thousands of businesses, apparently. There's incentives to bring data centers to Illinois. These are things that were demanded in last-minute negotiations at the end of the session when House Republican leader Jim Durkin went to the governor's office. I saw the governor just from out in front of the glass doors. I saw him going room to room. Negotiations were going on, and stuff did happen. And while Republicans didn't like the fact that there's the build up to a $15 minimum wage in the state by I think
That was big,
2025
yeah.
statewide, when business groups wanted a differential maybe lower for some parts of the state, but Pritzker stood strong with the unions and said no, it should be the same all over the state. And Republicans don't like the graduated income tax that Pritzker is moving toward and that the legislature passed to put on the ballot for next year. But clearly some business-oriented measures were included, even as Democrats got a lot and are increasing certain taxes and fees to pay for a construction program
And as you
budget.
say, Bernie, during the last few days of session, we saw a flurry of just action, negotiations happening until the very last minute. We as journalists, we didn't even know when it was all going to end, right? If we were going to have a budget on time, if all the big things like legalizing recreational marijuana or sports betting, gambling, what was going to happen with all of that? We didn't see it until probably the very last day, the last 2 days. And that's because Pritzker was, very involved in all of those talks.
I remember a news conference when very late in the session, I think some business groups and maybe labor groups were promoting the capital bill for capital improvements all over the state, saying this is a very important piece of legislation. And I was like, what piece of legislation?
Yeah.
Because you hadn't
Can you
seen
show
the
it to me,
language.
please?
Yes.
And they said, we've got 3 days left. What are you worried about? So yeah, things did come out. We didn't see the budget until very late. We didn't see the capital bill until very late. The legalized sports betting is apparently buried inside the financing of
Which
the
has
capital
yet to
plan.
be, the capital plan has yet to be signed. Sports betting and casino expansion has yet to be signed. The marijuana bill has yet to be signed as we tape this. So, but those were all giant things that all did wrap up within a 3-day period. And May 31st was the target date to end the session. They ended up finishing 2 days later on June 2nd, but they got it all done because they had enough votes.
And because it was done all very last minute, and we didn't really see a lot of these things until even lawmakers probably hadn't even seen a lot of these things until the last minute. I think right now, 2 weeks out, we're still trying to digest everything that happened. We're still probably going through the capital plan. We're still going through the budget. We're still going through what all of these big pieces of legislation have in them.
And I think constitutionally in Illinois, the governor has 60 days from the day he receives the bill to either sign it or veto it or do whatever. A lot of those bills haven't gotten to the governor yet. I'm not sure about the capital bill and the marijuana bill and everything, but
I'm guessing the big ones are going to be acted on.
I've been going through
within a
big,
reasonable amount of time.
long lists of bills, and it's it passed both chambers, but there's not the line at the bottom that says sent to the governor yet. So these things have to be fly-specced and typed up and
Well, it's
letter
also
perfect.
true. I think that they're counting for the budget on at least some money from the sports betting and casinos, at least the licensing part of it. Maybe they don't expect the revenue to start coming in, but people setting up these businesses are going to give the state some revenue, and I think
the recreational marijuana licensing.
Same kind of a thing.
Yeah.
That's right. We'll see.
Yeah.
Daisy, I'm talking in the AFSCME contract just about the different atmosphere, and of course, when you have a Democratic governor and Democratic legislature, overwhelmingly now, even more so than last year or than last session. There seemed to be more of a work together attitude or a different attitude. I guess there's just another aspect of what Governor Pritzker has done outside. I know when there was a Pride Festival downtown Springfield several weeks ago, the governor flew a pride flag at the executive mansion. That got a little bit of notice on social media. But just this last week or so, there was a pride flag, the multicolored flag, which is for LGBTQ rights, flying on top of the State House under the American flag Illinois flag and then the pride flag, and it turns out that the governor asked the Secretary of State to do that. That's certainly a different just atmosphere about what Governor Pritzker's doing.
I think like a different atmosphere across the board in a lot of things. I think this is the first time the pride flag has been flown outside for the state capitol and for the comptroller's office.
Right, which
also
Comptroller
has-
Susanna
yes.
Mendoza did that, controlled the building where they have a lot of offices.
Yeah, so like these community organizations for the LGBTQ community, they're saying, you know, this is a reflection of what the new governor is bringing to the table.
Yeah, I listened to some talk radio on not public radio in Chicago, and heard some discussion of this, and some people were unhappy with it. It's clearly a change, and some people are not comfortable with, why is that particular group of people getting those rights. On the other hand, Governor Pritzker, I think, is very strong in saying we're for rights for everybody, and want to make sure that people know that.
And you talk about the different atmosphere because there's a liberal Democratic governor and a pretty left-leaning Democratic legislature. It's starting to have some national implications, and I believe it was NPR that was reporting how going into the 2020 elections, Republicans want to win back the U.S. House, and the Reproductive Health Act in Illinois is one of the things that they want to weaponize and say, if you elect Democrats, this is what you're going to get.
Which means a very open / liberal abortion policy where Illinois is going to allow
in other parts of the Midwest,
the woman and her doctor in almost all cases to make that decision.
In other parts of the Midwest that are not Illinois, that's a message that Republicans think will sell pretty well.
Yeah, and not just with reproductive health care, but also with immigration. I think we saw a lot of pieces of legislation this session that had to deal with immigration, protection for families and mixed status families. And again, it's a response to what's happening at the federal level with the rhetoric, anti-immigrant rhetoric. And I think Governor Pritzker is trying to make that statement, and as well as the other now progressive caucus that we're seeing here in Springfield, that they're taking a stand. We're for women's rights, for immigration rights, and all of the above for people.
And I just, there's always another election coming, and we're not necessarily we're more at what just happened in the legislature phase. But of course, the 2020 election, we keep hearing about candidates. We know U.S. Senator Dick Durbin is running again. He's a Democrat. We know that there were gains made in Congress in Illinois in 2018 with a couple of Republican seats flipping to Democrat up in the suburbs, which was very surprising because they had been strong Republican areas. I tend to think that the fact that President Trump is not popular in the overall population of Illinois, despite the fact that he seems quite popular in parts of central and southern Illinois. A lot of the map in Illinois is red, Republican, but in the Metro East by St. Louis and in the Chicago area, it's quite blue, and I think President Trump and his rhetoric gets it even more Democratic. I don't know how that matches up with what's happening here. I mean, Hillary Clinton won, who I think the president has mentioned just within the last few days, won Illinois by about 16 points as other Midwest states went in the Trump category. And we'll just have to see by 2020 where that the impact is of President Trump probably being on the ballot again.
You mentioned the collar counties around Chicago. This is actually a trend that's happening in urban centers all over the United States. The ring counties outside the urban areas that have typically been upper middle class and fairly Republican in voting trends, they all started turning Democratic in many, many urban centers. Couple of factors at play. Donald Trump was obviously a factor. Also, there is a new generation of voters coming up, the Generation Z voters, people born after 9/11. And they are a very politically active group of young adults now. The shooting at the Parkland High School in Parkland, Florida, last year, really motivated a lot of students to come out. I was seeing them at the Kansas State House at the time.
Before you moved to Illinois for the new Capital News Illinois Bureau, yes?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is a very politically active and politically aware generation coming up, and they vote differently than their parents do.
I guess the question, and are you saying it's mostly Democratic?
It tends to
Because
be,
it doesn't always,
tends
obviously
to be
there are
mostly
conservative young
there
folks
are,
as well.
There are
Yeah.
politically active conservatives in the generation as well, but they don't behave, in terms of voting, they don't behave like the previous generations have.
I guess the question is, as in various years of the woman, as in motivation about gun situations, where nothing really happened with gun rights in Illinois this year, despite the fact that there have been mass shootings across the country. It depends if that motivation goes through to the next election, and I don't know if. I guess it depends who the Democrats nominate for president. I guess it depends what's going on in President Trump's administration, if there's impeachment or not, that kind of thing.
A lot of it up in the air right now.
It is indeed. So some of the bills that we have yet to do, Daisy, you mentioned the $45 billion capital plan. We don't yet know all of what's in it. We know that among money, and this again is not yet signed by Governor Pritzker, there is, for the roads and bridge section, there's going to be a doubling, if he signs it, which we all expect, of gasoline tax in Illinois from 19 cents to 38 cents a gallon. There's going to be an increase in cigarette prices for, I think that $1 a pack.
An extra $1 a pack.
And then there's going to be some fees on car licenses. And the cigarette tax in particular is supposed to help, they call it the vertical buildings on college campuses and other state buildings that need funding, where you can't use the gasoline tax for that. So as you said, Daisy, there's still a lot unknown about the plan, but Republicans as well as Democrats were for this.
Yes, because everybody wanted their roads and their bridges to be fixed. Everybody wants their public universities. Everybody wants the prisons in the state to be fixed. The buildings are falling apart. Students are in classrooms that are falling apart. So you can't have that. And I think Republicans as well as Democrats understood that aspect. And one very interesting thing that lawmakers decided to do, they're like, well, we haven't had a capital plan for over a decade. So how do we make it so that our gambling expansion plan also goes through? So it's all bundled up together. So now we have 6 new casinos and
authorized.
So
as the bill
if
gets
people
signed.
jump in on the opportunity to do that once it is signed. And built into this is also the legalization of sports betting, which a lot of states across the country have been doing over the past year after the U.S. Supreme Court decided that states can regulate it and get money out of it. And so the money and the fees, the licensing fees and other taxes from these casinos, if they ever come to fruition, or the legalization of sports betting, will go toward maintaining buildings, state-owned buildings. So yes, right now, because these things have not been signed, we don't know how the money is going to be allocated and just how soon we'll have the revenue to go toward these things.
Yeah, and we know there's been a big fight in Chicago, or at least a discussion about where to put a new casino, because the earlier gambling boats, they can be land-based now, but as we've had casinos around the state over the years, Chicago was never put in that, and the Chicago people argue, well, everybody's going to Wisconsin and Indiana to do their gambling and not here, so we will see where that goes. There's also the marijuana bill, and Peter, governor, clearly campaigned on that, so we're going to be that state that has done this through the legislature.
And interestingly enough, there are a lot of other things built into that marijuana bill. Social justice, equity issues, as they refer to them. A lot of the money that's generated out of this is supposed to go back into communities that supporters say were disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. Community reinvestment funds, the expungement of previous criminal arrests or convictions.
Right, which keep people from getting new jobs. And there was a lot of talk about black and brown communities. There's more arrests, and there's, people don't have good lawyers.
The usage rate is pretty much uniform across ethnic groups, but the arrest and conviction rate is heavily tilted toward people of color. And it's been that way for a long time throughout the United States. And so it's not just the legalization of marijuana and the revenue coming from it, but the supporters really feel like this is going to right many of the social wrongs that have occurred since the Nixon administration.
Speaking of marijuana or something like it, but not exactly, is hemp. Farmers can now grow hemp in Illinois. That's a first in many decades. And Peter, I think you've done some work on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Illinois Department of Agriculture started granting licenses earlier this year. I think it was right around end of April. And I think it's like, close to 13,000 acres have been licensed, which is a lot more than anybody suspected. But at the same time, we've had this incredibly wet spring. You might notice it's been raining here in Illinois. And farmers, whether you're planting corn or soybeans or trying to plant hemp, they're having a difficult time getting a crop into the ground.
Which makes it difficult, and I think you mentioned, I don't know about if there's federal insurance for that or not.
And that's it's currently a very risky operation for a farmer. It's the upfront capital investment cost is extremely high. The cost of seeds ranges from maybe 25 cents to $1 per seed.
Wow.
And there are no certified seeds because it hasn't been a legal crop for so long. There's no federal USDA crop insurance program for it. And once you have your crop, when you harvest, which is also very difficult because there's not highly mechanized harvesting equipment for this crop, it's very labor intensive. Then you have to sell it, and hemp is not a crop you can take down to the grain elevator and unload like you do corn and soybeans and wheat. So they're still waiting for trying to develop sustainable markets for the crop, as well as the whole agricultural infrastructure, from genetics for the seed all the way up to the planting equipment and the harvesting equipment.
Wow, interesting.
A lot going on there.
There is. We've had some kind of interesting personnel changes. There's a state representative for 23 years named Mike McAuliffe. He was the last Republican from Chicago in the House. He's been in for more than 20 years. His late father, Roger McAuliffe, who was a Chicago policeman and also a state representative for 23 years, and tragically died in a boating accident more than 2 decades ago. That's when his son was named. Mike McAuliffe just resigned from the House, saying 23 years is enough. He has young children now, a couple of young children, and it was time to move on. So I don't know, this seems to add more to Chicago is just Democratic, and it used to be in the olden days when there were before the 1970 Constitution, or before the Cutback Amendment actually, that Pat Quinn moved in the early 1980s. You had 3 House members from each Senate district, and so there was always at least one Democrat and one Republican in each district. Now all of Chicago is Democratic, and Republicans come from elsewhere. It's kind of an interesting
the way I see it,
polarization, I guess.
A weird shift, right? As we were talking earlier on, what's a reflection of what Illinois is becoming and the fight to maintain, to get it back.
This has been going on for a few generations now. Political scientists call it sorting. That Republicans tend to live around other Republicans and Democrats tend to live around other Democrats. And it's part of why you see this huge polarization in America, especially between urban and rural communities. And you see that a lot in Illinois. That a state representative from Cairo does not see the world the same way as a state representative from Chicago.
There is some of that going on. Interestingly, there is some bipartisanship with Mike McAuliffe, and he's a very nice person. I've always enjoyed working with him. But his wife is Kim Morreale, who actually worked out at IDOT during the Blagojevich administration, and she has a PR firm that was doing work for the tollway for a while. So she worked in a Democratic administration. So there's a little bipartisanship in the McAuliffe House, and I wish them all well. There was another kind of an interesting political situation in the last week. I actually reported because I heard it when I went to one of the local Democratic meetings. I try to go to meetings of both parties in Sangamon County. And Colleen Callahan, who once ran against Aaron Schock for Congress, she's from Peoria County, near Kickapoo on a farm, is the new director of the Department of Natural Resources. But she also got named to a spot on the Democratic State Central Committee. On the Democratic State Central Committee, where primary voters elect members, but Shirley McCombs from Petersburg was a longtime member. She passed away. Colleen Callahan was named to that spot, but then our friend Rich Miller of Capitol Facts in Springfield raised questions about should a director of a department that hires a lot of people and is high profile also be on the Democratic State Central Committee or one of the party committees. And within a day or within hours, Colleen Callahan resigned from that. So it's just kind of an interesting move, and now they're looking for another member of that. There's one man and one woman from each congressional district on the Democratic State Central Committee.
And this chairman of the Democratic Party in Illinois, of course, is the Speaker of the House.
Mike Madigan.
So,
that's right.
You know, party business and government business isn't necessarily all that separated in Illinois.
And there was no indication Colleen Callahan was doing anything wrong, but she took that question off the table.
Some
and there
pressure
we go.
there,
Yeah.
yes.
And Daisy, I think you covered actually a fun story this week when there was a Bible that was owned by Abraham Lincoln that is now the property of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum in Springfield.
Yes, so this Bible, I mean, there are a few Bibles out there that different museums currently have. The former President Barack Obama did his inauguration in his on one of the Bibles,
On
I
the
think,
Lincoln Bible,
and the
right.
Lincoln Bible, and I think
President Trump used the same one, I
did the same
think.
one. Yeah, he did. So this one has been kept by a family for 150 years.
Wow.
Mary Todd Lincoln gave it to this neighbor of hers, the Reverend. And 150 years later, it's been unveiled. And so, like, Mary Todd Lincoln wanted this Reverend to help her, dispel the myth that Lincoln was not a religious man.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this was kind of like her proof that, he used this Bible, became very religious toward the end of the Civil War, and that, she wanted people to know this fact about her husband.
And 150 years later, Mary Todd is still having that power over us.
Yes.
With that, we're going to end it for now and await the governor's next action on some of these big bills. Daisy Contreras and Peter Hancock, thanks for your help. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.